Growing up with ghosts, I see dead people. Those four words from The Sixth Sense have woven their way into popular culture and will forever be synonymous with a person describing his ability to see and communicate with ghosts. Since this highly successful film was released in 1999, a whole slew of books, movies, and TV shows have been created, most of which would have never seen the light of day a decade ago. No one seems impervious to a ghostly encounter or two anymore. In fact, people come up to me all the time to describe their own often incredible stories of ghostly apparitions. I am extremely thankful that I have been a part of educating others about spirit communication and life after death. To begin on this journey of discovery, I first want to assure everyone that there is no such thing as death. Death refers only to the end of the physical body. I say this with surety because since the age of 2 I have been communicating with the dead. Ghosts walk among us, impressing us with their love, guiding us with their wisdom, and protecting us from harm. 6 ghosts among us. The love of a grandfather. I will never forget the very first time I became aware of the others from a different world. I was a toddler in my crib, and I heard the sound of adult laughter coming from another room. I wanted so much to be out of the crib and with my parents. Like many babies, I cried for attention. My mother came into my room, picked me up, and soothed me for a while, then left me alone again. She didn't understand that I wanted to be with her and the rest of the adults in that other room. Night after night, I would stay awake and listen to the adults. After a while, I became aware of tiny, sparkling lights dancing around my room, making unique patterns on the wall and around my crib. These sparkling lights fascinated me. Then one night the lights came together and formed a shape. I could see the shadow of a man standing in the corner of the room, his bright blue eyes piercing the darkness. He had a glow about him, a glow that came from inside out. I felt his presence to be very calming and loving. As he came closer to my crib, he smiled. There was nothing to be afraid of, in fact, he looked familiar to me. Although he never said anything, I could understand this man's thoughts. After his initial appearance, this ghost would occasionally visit and send me telepathic thoughts about painted ponies trotting around a ring of colorful shapes. I understood his thoughts because they were in the form of pictures, and I always felt a lot of light and love from him. As I grew older, his ghostly visits stopped. By the time I was ready to start kindergarten, I would often spend weekends visiting my grandmother. The two of us shared a very special bond, and our visits were always filled with laughter and good food. On one of my trips to Grandma's apartment, I took out a family photo album. She sat next to me and told me about the people in the photos. When I saw the picture of the growing up with ghost 7 man with the bright blue eyes, standing in front of ATR I pointed at it and asked, "Who's that?" "He's your grandfather," she said. "He died before you were born. He came from England and went to work for the rodeo. You know, he even got a job setting up tents for the Buffalo Bill Wild West show. I know him, Giare Kendma. He used to visit me when I was a baby and tell me stories about the horses." My grandmother smiled. I knew she didn't believe me. She merely added, "He loved telling stories about cowboys and Indians." Years later, when I had begun my work as a medium, I remember finishing a reading and turning off my tape recorder. From the corner of my room, I heard a ghost say, "Good boy, James. I'm proud of you, son." The kindly tone triggered the long ago memory of the man with the bright blue eyes. I knew it was my grandfather. It was reassuring to know that he was still around watching over me. A child's sensitivity, my ghostly visitations had become a special part of my life, but unlike the boy in The Sixth Sense, I was never afraid of seeing or hearing ghosts, because they appeared to me as orbs of light. It all seemed so natural to me, as if everyone could see what I could see. However, I was a sensitive child. I remember being terribly shy, and I didn't say much to anyone besides my mother and siblings. Other than seeing ghosts, I spent a fairly normal childhood. I lived in a small house in a family neighborhood of Bayside, Tildaines. The block was always filled with kids outside playing kickball or riding bikes. As I grew older, my shyness faded away, and I became more talkative and outgoing. However, I was always acutely aware of other people and could sense how the 8 ghosts among us would act before they did. I could also tell when someone was truthful and trustworthy or when someone was deceitful and insincere. I was never really close to any of my schoolmates, even my best friend didn't know I could see ghosts. Sometimes I felt like a stranger in a strange land. I realized that I was different and had to accept that fact. It seemed that the only ones I trusted were the ghosts. They were always friendly and interested in my welfare. I looked forward to communicating with these beings because they were the only ones who truly knew who I was. They were my real friends, and I felt extremely safe having them around. My mother was the only human to whom I confided. She knew about my secret life with ghosts. Fearing for my well-being, she would warn me, "Jamie, don't ever tell anybody what you see. They won't understand what you're talking about. You're different from other children." It just so happened that my mother was also different. She was extremely psychic and had the knack of predicting events before they happened. Sometimes I would pass her room and catch her in conversation with her deceased mother and father. I know because I could see their ghostly figures standing at the foot of her bed. Ghosts haunt the church like many Catholic children in my neighborhood. I went to Sacred Heart Catholic School. My mother and I attended Mass every Sunday. We loved to sit in the balcony with the choir because we had a bird's eye view of all the people in the pews and the priest up on the altar. The only thing that truly frightened me was the 15-foot crucifix with poor Jesus nailed to it. I used to wonder, why would people depict God suffering like that? I admit that one didn't always understand what was going on growing up with Ghosts 9 and wasn't really interested. However, I did enjoy the singing and the smell of incense. At that time, Mass was said in Latin. Usu alai, I would nod off into an altered state of consciousness as the priest droned on in a language I couldn't understand. I would see a myriad of ghosts milling about the aisles of the church. Some knelt in front of statues, others followed the priest at the altar, but mostly the ghosts stood alongside the churchgoers. Looking down from the balcony, I could see deceased parents around their children sharing Mass with them. I could see many child ghosts running around, playing with the hair or clothing of the living children. Some of the living children were aware of the ghosts and would play along. Sometimes a child would be frightened and let out a scream, and a parent would turn and scold him or her to be quiet. It all seemed like a fun game to me. On other occasions, I could see ghosts kneeling in front of the statues of Mary, Jesus, or one of the saints. I used to ask my mother, why do they need to come to church and pray to the statues? Don't they see the real Mary and Jesus in heaven? My mother would answer me, some people have old habits that make them feel good. Generally speaking, a church is a vortex of spiritual energy, no matter the faith or denomination. People come together as a group to worship, contemplate, and pray in the name of God. These actions energize the spirit world, and ghosts show up to influence us with their love and guidance. It is no wonder that church is a place in which people find a safe haven. I have a vivid recollection of one particular Sunday when the priest at the altar was holding the host, the thin, round wafer that represents the body of Christ, above his head in consecration. He repeated a prayer in Latin, and everyone answered. It was at that moment that I saw several illuminated spirits dressed in white robes walk through the wall of the tabernacle. I knew 10 ghosts among us. They were special ghosts from heaven because I could feel a sense of adoration and reverence. Feeling so moved, I said out loud, Mom, look at those men in white on the altar. Are they angels? Everyone in the balcony turned in my direction. My mother's wide-eyed, stern gaze said it all. I knew better keep my mouth shut before I got deeper into trouble. I certainly didn't want to upset my mother any more than I already had. However, I will always remember that beautiful sight. Seeing those heavenly messengers has proven to be one of the many sources of inspiration I have had along this wonderful journey. The lady in pink. A year after I made my first communion, I was at Sunday Mass with my class. We all sat in the front pews of the church. Back then, before we could receive communion, we had to fast. Toward the middle of Mass, before the Lord's Prayer, I felt an intense pain in my stomach. I thought it was my poor empty belly crying out for food. The pain was so intense that I had to lie on the floor between the seat and the kneeler. The voice of the priest faded into the background, and I could feel the back of my neck getting wet with sweat. I wished someone could help me, but I was too afraid of being reprimanded by the nuns for acting weird, so I just stayed put. After a while, I was in my own little world. Suddenly I looked up, and a beautiful lady in a pink dress, with red hair, blue eyes, and the softest skin I had ever seen, bent over me. I looked into her eyes and heard her clearly through the din of the Mass. Don't worry about what others think, James. You should never, Fralambar asked, to be who you are. As I help you today, one day you will help others in the same way. You will bring others peace. Love yourself, and all will be well. I awakened from my trance-like state and managed to maneuver myself so that I could lean against the pew. By then, the priest growing up with ghosts too was reciting the closing prayers. I was able to sit upright and look around. The lady in pink had vanished. As I peeked over at the other children, I was aware that no one wanted to make eye contact with me. What could they be thinking, greater than I wondered? I kept my mouth shut because I was still a little dazed and confused about the lady in pink. It wasn't until many years later that I understood her message. It was one of many messages I had received by then from ghosts about bringing peace, hope, and love to others. A ghostly rescue because I was a shy, sensitive young man. I didn't have many friends. I wasn't into sports, nor was I the class clown. I was friendly enough, but not to everyone, and especially not to the school's troublemakers. These kids just seemed so ridiculous to me. They were always vying for attention from anyone and everyone. When I was in 5th grade, Mike Marks was the class bully. Mike always sat in the back of the room so that he could make disturbing noises to ruin the class's concentration. He had a quick temper and a mean streak that was difficult to control. Our history teacher, Mr. Reed, was usually a calm man. He was articulate and smart and always seemed to make history come alive. One day Mike drove Mr. Reed to his boiling point. Mr. Reed called Mike to the front of the class and hit him over and over with his pointer. It was hard to watch Mike get a whipping, even if he deserved one. Then I saw the ghost. Like many of my visions, this ghost had a luminous light around him. It was a tall male figure, with brown hair and dark, swarthy features. He stood to the right of Mike and sadly watched Mike getting a licking. At one point, the ghost brought his hands up to his face to shield the horrible scene from his eyes. I realized that the ghost was Mike's father, and he wanted to tell Mike how sorry he was. I wished I could have relayed the message to Mike, but at the time that was impossible. I felt sorry for Mike. I had 12 ghosts among us always thought that the poor guy was probably beaten by his father and that was why he acted the way he did. Perhaps his outbursts were a cry for help. Outside of the classroom, I saw Mike only at Cub Scout meetings. He was just as loud and obnoxious there as he was in school. One day on my way home from school, Mike was behind me, walking in the same direction. He caught up with me and asked if he could join me. I only agreed because I thought it was cool to hang out with the big bully. He suggested that we go by the train trestle. It's out of my way, I said timidly. Mike picked up a rock and aimed it at my head. I was petrified. In a threatening tone, he said, "Do what I say, or I'll crack your head open." I walked with Mike a good 45 minutes to the train trestle. It was in the most out of the way location next to the Clearview Expressway. No one was around because no one would have a reason to be there. By then, Mike had already thrown down the rock, so I figured he was goofing with me. When we arrived at the trestle, Mike told me to sit down and take off my sneakers. "Seaman, Mike," I said. "The joke's over. I'm going home." Mike got angry again. "Do it, or I'll beat you up." I quickly untied my shoes and handed them to Mike. Holding my shoes over the expressway, Mike said, "Tell me I'm great, or I'll fling them over." I didn't know which was worse, getting beat up by Mike or getting punished by my father for losing my sneakers. I thought Mike was crazy, and I just wanted to get away from him. I started to run away, but Mike grabbed me and threw me down. My hands and face hit the ground hard. Growing up with ghosts, I began to plead. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can. Don't you know I'm great?" 13 I started to run again. This time when Mike caught me, he held me over the zooming afternoon traffic. One was scared to death, he was crazy enough to drop me. "Put me down," I screamed. Mike just laughed. Suddenly the ghost I had seen standing next to Mike in the classroom returned. He looked the same, only this time he seemed to be brighter. The ghost sent me his thoughts. "I am Michael, Mike's dad. Your father is talking to me," I said to Mike. "What are you talking about?" Mike yelled back. "Your father is here with us." Mike put me down on the ground and looked at me like I was the crazy one. "Your father is saying that it was not your fault. He was drunk and got into a car accident." Mike stared at me. "He says he was supposed to go to your little league game, but he didn't show up because he died the night before." "That's not true," Mike insisted. "My mother said he left us." Mike's father told me that his wife lied because she felt too guilty about having an affair. She had asked Mike's father for a divorce the day he died. "Don't blame yourself," I said. "It wasn't your fault. He says he is very proud of you, and he's sorry that you didn't KNW the real story about his death." Mike threw my sneakers at me and ran away. The ghost thanked me for telling his son the truth. I felt sorry for the ghost, but thanked him for saving my life. 14 ghosts among us. Mike never spoke to me again. I learned from my mother that Mike's father did die in an auto accident. A year after that incident, Mike disappeared from the neighborhood. I later heard he went to military school in upstate New York. Starting over, the older I grew, the less interest I had in ghosts. I spent a year in a high school preparatory seminary and realized that although I was searching for the answers, the Catholic Church wasn't the place I would find them. When I entered public high school, I was too wrapped up in being a teenager to deal with the other side. I was still very intuitive, but I sort of closed the portal to my visions. By then, I had entered San Francisco State College and was majoring in broadcasting. I wanted to pursue a career as a TV comedy writer. After college, I moved to LA, where I got a lot of odd jobs in the film business to learn what it was all about. One day, Carol, a friend from the office, asked me to go with her to a seance. I wasn't sure that I wanted to start this whole business with ghosts again, but I went, mostly out of curiosity. There I met Brian E. Hurst, a gifted and popular medium. At one point in the seance, Brian turned to me and said, "The spirits tell me that you are a gifted medium and one day will be doing this work too." I thought to myself, "Pound, no way. I'm not this crazy. I'm going to be a TV writer, not someone who speaks to the dead." However, my interest was piqued, and I kept going back to Brian's weekly seances. Eventually, I began to see ghosts again, just like when I was a kid. So I started doing my own individual readings, first with friends and then with referrals. After a year, the readings had become a full time job, and I had to make a choice. Was I going to quit readings to pursue TV, or was I going to quit TV to growing up with ghosts 15 pursue communication with ghosts? Needless to say, I quit my day job in show business and became a full time medium. That was almost 25 years ago, and it has been a wild ride ever since. Having tilde traveled around the world, I can say without a doubt that ghosts are among us everywhere.